Hello and welcome to the Rehmann podcast series. This is Jim Karp, and during this COVID pandemic, we're going to try to get as much information as we can out to you as quickly as possible. In this series, we're going to be covering technology, the importance of backups. Let's cut over to a conversation I had with Brian Young. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome. This is Jim Karp with Rehmann, and I have Brian Young with me. Brian, can you introduce yourself?
Good morning, Jim. Absolutely. Welcome, everybody. My name is Brian Young. I am a principal with Rehmann Technology Services based out of our Grand Rapids office. Thanks for having me on today, Jim. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And today we're going to talk about backups. So why don't we start off with the definition? From your perspective, Brian, what is a backup? And then we can go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great starting point. So backup is one of those age-old terms. It's been around as long as computer systems or data has been around, but it does good to actually step back and define it. So backing up your company's data really enables business continuity in the event of data loss or corruption or some kind of human error or natural or man-made disaster. And virtually all organizations, big or small, any size, should regularly be backing up their data because it's what's needed for business operations and to ensure that the restore processes involved have been tested and documented and that they work. So that's really what data backup is in a nutshell.
Okay, so a lot of people sometimes say, I've got a disaster recovery or a business continuity plan. What's the difference between those? Is a backup strategy, like business continuity or disaster recovery plan from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a good place to start as well, because really a backup or a data backup plan is part of your business continuity and disaster recovery plan, but it is not the whole plan. So developing a data backup strategy begins with identifying what data needs to be backed up and then selecting and implementing hardware or software procedures, scheduling and conducting the backups, and then periodically validating or testing that the data can accurately be backed up and then restored. So it's part of the business continuity or disaster recovery plan, but by itself, it's not the plan. It's just a component of it.
Okay, so based on that, then, in the simplest form, what is a data backup plan? I know you kind of touched on it. Let's pull that out separately, and then can we compare and contrast that to a disaster recovery plan in its simplest form?
Yeah, absolutely. Very easy to do. Simple statement. A backup plan is really a strategy of creating a copy of data that can be recovered and restored in case the original is lost or corrupted. It's really that straightforward. That's what the backup plan should be, or the definition should be. Recovery plan is a detailed plan. So this is a little bit more intense, but it's a plan that tackles the elements that make up system dependencies, the order in which systems are to be restored, and then what permissions are needed to accomplish it. So, if you pull it together, a backup and recovery plan defines the entire process. It's a business's data backup and recovery needs, and it will specify the workflow that basically meets all those needs. It's important to go through it to ensure that the mission critical workloads that run the business continue to function, especially if there's a time of crisis or when you have to go back and restore the data.
Okay, so in the simple form, you've got the data defined, you know what your recovery plan is. As a business owner, how often should I back up my data, and what's a good strategy for that?
Yeah, so that's going to vary. So data should be backed up as frequently as necessary. And it's really to ensure that if the data is lost, it's not unacceptable to the business. So there's some definitions around that we'll talk about in a second, but a business impact analysis really starts this, and it should evaluate the potential for lost data, and then it should define the recovery point objective. Data restoration times also should be tested and confirmed that they meet the business's recovery time objective. So those acronyms, RPO and RTO, are really what's being defined when you do a business impact analysis, and it should drive your backup plan and strategy as a whole, Jim.
Okay, now I know you want to talk about those in just a little bit. What would be the impact? I mean, a lot of times people have to weigh the benefit of doing backups and the cost associated with it. What's the business impact if I make the wrong decision?
I mean, virtually it could be a life or death decision. It sounds kind of Bad to say that way, but it's that critical. Losing data can not only put your company at risk, but can also, if you house client data and that's lost in the process, it'll have a significant impact on a client's credibility or your credibility. Alternatively, you could be at risk of losing data permanently and not even being able to restore it. In today's world, we're dealing with viruses and malware that attack your hardware. They can destroy operating systems and data, and those are just some of the most current threats. And there's some pretty well-defined studies that show that 45% of all unplanned downtime is caused by hardware failure, but more surprisingly, 60% of IT pros who work in this space say that it's really the employees that are the most significant risk to the company's data. And then it goes even farther. I mean, there's great stats out there that say, around the topic of how important this is,
Hmm.
it's estimated that 60% of companies that experience data loss and don't have a solid backup plan, really, the potential for them to close within 6 months is very high. So it's that critical, it's that important, and the business should consider it.
Okay, so given that as the backdrop, then we know the impact associated with it. What are the risks? You kind of mentioned about the associates and their impact to it. What other risks are there to the data as we house it and hold on to it?
Sure. So, in today's world, given the current pace of cybercrime growth and what we hear about every day, you'll want to consider best practices to protect your data from hackers and really outside abuse. And there's some questions you really just need to ask yourself to determine what your risks and what the risks are that you must consider. Um, be honest with yourself. I mean, they're kind of tough questions. So have you ever been hacked, or have you had a situation where you've been part of a crime or something of that nature? Um, are careless employees a concern when it comes to security to the data in the organization? Maybe it's about your location. Are you at risk for weather related damage like flooding or tornadoes or wildfires, something of that nature?
Hmm.
Or, do clients log into your system to access data or services that you provide them? So, if you really have that discussion, asking these questions will help you identify your risks. And that's the first part of it.
Okay.
I mean, it's pretty straight from there because a company in a hurricane prone area might be worried about things like flooding and wind damage. A customer linked to your data adds additional risks that you really need to be careful about. So be as thorough as you can when you do assess your risks, and try to be as honest as you can with yourself and your team about those risks.
Okay, so far we've defined the difference between a backup, disaster recovery. We've discussed some of the risks associated with it, lightly touched on a little bit of the strategy along those lines. What
Yeah.
what all do you need to get a good solid backup infrastructure in place?
Yeah. So the infrastructure of the backup systems today can vary greatly, but really, as you go through it and you think through it and you ask yourself the questions and define it, what you should keep in mind as the next step is find the systems that match your needs based on your assessment. I mean, if you're concerned about the possibility of hardware failure and natural disasters, then you'll want to consider offsite backup solutions. There also may be some benefit to having an on-site physical backup for quick recovery of data. And it can save you in that case, in case you lose your internet service and you can't connect to the offsite copies. So using a combination of on-site and cloud-based services is commonly known as a hybrid strategy. And that's what we see the majority of the time is deployed today. Um, the absolute best way to avoid a continued business disruption is also to choose a remote cloud disaster recovery site or partner. And it could be someone like your data center provider or someone of that nature. But you need to make sure you pick a place that would provide you with access to IT equipment, internet service, and any other assets you need to run your business or recover your data from.
Okay. How about how long should I keep my backups?
Yeah, that's another common question. So that's going to vary from business to business. Storage is cumulative. If you expect to accumulate a lot of data, you'll need space to accommodate it. Some companies have regulatory requirements for backup retention, and that's going to impact a client's decision as well.
Okay, and you're touching on regulation right there. Any thoughts or strategies like where that should be stored and how that should be handled?
Yeah. So when you're in a regulated industry, It adds an extra layer of complexity. So this largely is going to depend on the type of industry that you're in and what company policies are in place that govern data storage requirements. The best answer really for this will likely be found by meeting with the executives from your company's HR or legal departments and identifying what the options are available for your particular sector. Um, Once you've got the specifics or once they're known, then where and when data should be backed up and in accordance to how it should be stored can be really decided. And once again, certain types of industries have different regulations than others. Um, a common example that we see is a company may be allowed to keep data offsite at a cloud-based storage provider. However, since part of the data being backed up includes customer records and other personally identifiable information, PII is the acronym, you would be required to find a service that not only encrypts data transfers from end to end, but also adds an additional layer of security by encrypting the data stored on the servers as well. That's called data at rest.
Mhm.
And that's required in certain industries to further protect consumer or customer records in the event of a security breach. Um, there's some simple principles out there too, especially in the corporate realm. A quick acronym is one called the CIA principle. It really stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And really, it was born as an information security practice, but it correlates really well to data backup since it's largely made up of the very same data that needs to be protected. Um, Simple definitions. Confidentiality refers to restricting the data to only the parties that require access to the information. And typically this will include include encrypting the data, so only those with the decryption keys can have access to view it.
Mhm.
Integrity requires ensuring that the data is correct. It's not been modified or made corrupt, thus, basically making the information useless. An example of an integrity would be something like file versioning, which is included in most cloud-based services as a means to roll back the data in the event that the current iteration of the file becomes lost or damaged or corrupt. And then the A is availability. That involves the data being accessible to users as needed whenever it's needed. And data backups may fail from time to time. Be prepared for that due to equipment failure, software glitches, human error, or the internet cutting out and not being able to make a connection to the cloud-based service. So when that does occur, a backup for the backup would fill the gap and still keep data protected from loss. So those are kind of the simple principles to think about and to follow.
You talked a little bit just a second ago about the backups failing. What are your thoughts on testing?
So testing should be part of the whole plan. It should happen regularly, should be scheduled, and it should be thorough. I think some of the mistakes that are commonly made today that we see is that folks might not even do a test restore until it's too late. When the time comes and they're really called upon and they go to restore, they find out that the data is unrestorable. You should probably schedule it at least quarterly, maybe semi-annually, and it also might depend on your industry. And you should do more than just a simple restore. You should do maybe as extensive as a folder or a whole directory restore. And it should be part of your DR plan. Make sure you can recover data at the time that you need it most.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here. Brian, any final thoughts or comments that you'd like to share?
It should be part of your plan, everybody. This is something, again, is age old. It goes back to, as I started this segment with you, Jim, it goes back to the time when we had computers and started creating data. Sometimes it's forgotten. People kind of take it for granted. And I think really it becomes a cornerstone of what protects you, your company, your clients, and your reputation in the marketplace. Be honest with yourself, do your assessments, answer your questions. There's a lot of great solutions out there and a lot of providers that can come alongside with you and make sure that you're protected.
Okay, sounds good. So if somebody wants to reach out and they have further questions, what's the best way to contact you?
Absolutely. You can reach me directly through my email, which is brian.young. So that's BRIAN.YOUNG at Rehmann.com. Or you can simply call us anytime. We'd be more than happy to consult with you or talk through the process and help answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Brian, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks for having me on today, Jim.
Yep, take care.